This is Miss Humbert here. Today we're going to be doing Unit 3, Notes 5, talking about negative exponents. So we're going to learn what to do when you find negative exponents. Alright, so let's take a look at negative exponents. So you're going to invert the location of the term with the negative exponent to make the exponent positive. So let's say, for example, we had a, oops, I should probably get my pen out. We have a to the negative 2 divided by b to the negative 2. So what that means is if your negative is on the top, you need to flip it to the bottom. If your negative is on the bottom, you need to flip it to the top. So then when you flip it to the top, it'll become positive. So that b squared is going to be positive on top, and that a squared is going to be positive on the bottom. So you're really just flipping the location of the thing with a negative exponent. Now here's where students make mistakes. Make sure, remember when you're doing negative exponents, that you only flip the location of just the variable with a negative exponent. You're not flipping all of the things associated with the thing with a negative exponent. It is only the element or the letter or the number that's being raised to the negative exponent, not the coefficient that's with it, not the letter that's next to it, just the letter itself that has the negative exponent. Now let's take a look at what I'm talking about. So here we have 1, and then we have a to the negative 2. Well, first of all, when there's no bottom, the bottom is just 1. So this is the same thing as over 1. Now I need to take it and I need to get rid of my negative exponent. So I have a to the negative 2 up top. So to make that positive, I'm going to flip it to the bottom, which I don't have yet, but I will. Now here's the key point. This 4 needs to stay on top. The a to the negative 2 flips to the bottom and it becomes positive. Okay, so then this right here is our final answer. The biggest thing I want you to notice is that that 4 stays put. Same thing with number 2. We're going to take this x to the negative 1 and we're going to flip it up top. That 3 is going to stay where it belongs. So I have x to the first divided by 3, which I really could just write as x divided by 3. Again, you're only flipping the thing that has the negative number, nothing else. Let's take a look at number 3. So for number 3, we have b to the negative 2 on the bottom. So since that b is negative on the bottom, we need to flip it up to the top to make it positive. So it's b to the negative 2 on the bottom. So I have 6a, and now I flipped that b to the negative to the top, so it's going to become a positive. So I have 6ab squared. So now my bottom disappears. So technically this is over 1, but most students would just write out their answer as 6ab squared as their final answer for number 3. Next, let's take a look at number 4. So for number 4, we want to flip some things around. So this a to the negative 2 is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it to the top. This b to the negative 3 is negative on the top, so I need to flip it to the bottom. Notice that my 4 stays put. My 4 doesn't have a negative exponent. My a to the negative 2 is going to join it on top, and it's going to become positive. And my b to the negative 3 is going to flip to the bottom, and it's going to become positive down there. Now let's take a look at our simplified checklist to make sure everything is fully simplified. For the most part, it stays the same. Each base appears exactly once. There are no powers of powers. All fractions are in simplest form. And last but not least, there's no negative exponents. Okay, that's the biggest thing. If you leave a negative exponent in there, then it's not considered fully simplified. Okay, so let's take a look at a little bit more complex examples. So, taking a look at these. So now, again, we just want to flip things that have negative exponents. So I see that this d to the negative 5 is negative down here. So I'm going to flip it to the top. This b to the negative 3 is negative up here, so I'm going to flip it to the bottom. So the c squared is staying put. It doesn't have a negative exponent. It's staying on top. Well, now that d to the negative 5th is joining it on top, and it's going to become positive. Then that b to the negative 3 is going to flip down to the bottom. Once all of them are positive, we only have each base written once. All our fractions are simplified, no powers of powers. So that right there is our final answer. Now number 6 looks like it could be really overwhelming. So we're just going to take it piece by piece. So the first thing we're going to do is simplify negative 3 over 21. Well, negative 3 and 21 are both divisible by 3. So I'm going to write that as the fraction negative 1 over 7. Now I'm just going to work my way around. A to the negative fourth, well, that's negative on top, so that means it needs to be flipped to the bottom. So I'm going to write it on the bottom down here. That takes care of that one. B to the seventh is positive. It's good to go. I don't need to change anything about it. It's going to stay on top. A squared is positive on the bottom, so I'm going to keep it on the bottom. B to the seventh, positive on the bottom. I'm going to keep it on the bottom. C to the negative fifth is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it to the top. So now I've dealt with all of my negative exponents. Now I need to start simplifying. So let's take a look at my A's. So I notice that my A's are both on the bottom, which I need to use multiplying my monomials then. So I have A to the fourth times A squared. Well, that's going to give me A to the sixth, because when you multiply them, you need to add them together. Then I notice I have B to the seventh times B to the seventh. Well, those two are going to cancel out because they have the same exponent. So I've dealt with this and this. So that leaves me with C to the fifth on the top. The only thing I can't forget is that C to the fifth is negative. So I have negative C to the fifth divided by 7A to the sixth. And that's my final answer for number 6. Everything's fully simplified. Taking a look at number 7, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by simplifying my fraction. So I have negative 3 over negative 12. First of all, both my negatives are going to cancel. 3 and 12, both are divisible by 3, so I'm left with 1 over 4 as my starting fraction. So I'm just going to work my way through. So first I have q to the negative 2, so I'm going to flip that to the bottom and get q squared. And then I have r to the first up here, so that's going to stay r to the first. S to the 4 is positive up there, so it's going to stay up there. Q, positive on the bottom, so q to the first is going to stay in the bottom. R to the negative 3 is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it to the top, and it's going to become positive. S to the negative 5 is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it up to the top, and it's going to become positive. So now I want to simplify my letters. So first thing I notice is that I have r to the first times r cubed. So now we're going to add those exponents because they're both being multiplied on the numerator. So add those exponents. Then I have s to the fourth times s to the fifth. Again, they're both being multiplied in the numerator, so I can add those exponents and get s to the ninth. Then we're dividing by 4, and then we have q squared times q to the first. Add those exponents, and you get q cubed. So this right here is your final answer. You could leave the 1 in front of the r if you wanted to, but you don't need it. Okay, the biggest thing is that we got rid of all of those negative exponents. So let's take a look at number 8 now. So we want to simplify 24 divided by negative 6. So that's just going to end up being negative 4 over 1. Now let's go and simplify. That x is negative on the top, so I'm going to flip it to the bottom. That y to the fourth is positive on top, so I'm going to keep it on top. That x to the third is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it up top. That again, negative on the bottom, flip it up top. Negative on the bottom, flip it up top. So now that I've dealt with all of my negatives, I'm going to deal with dividing and combining. So first I have negative 4. Okay, so then I notice I have y, or let's do x. So I have x to the third times x to the first. Well, I add those exponents, I get x to the fourth. Then I have y to the fourth times y squared. That's going to give me x to the sixth. I apologize, this letter was z. I couldn't see over my circles. Whoops. Okay, let's go ahead and change that. Alright, so when I combine those, so now I'm just dividing. So I have x cubed divided by x squared. So you subtract those exponents and you end up with x to the first or just x. Then y to the fourth times y squared, that gives you y to the sixth. And lastly you have that z that I forgot earlier, which is z to the first. So that's your final answer for number 8. Now let's take a look at number 9. If you ever have something in a parenthesis and it's raised to a negative power, that means you need to flip the fraction over. For this one, however, let's simplify inside first. We have d to the 1 divided by d to the 5. Well, that's going to end up being d to the fourth. My larger number of d's is on the bottom, so I'm going to put my d to the fourth on the bottom of my fraction. Now this guy right here is being raised to the negative 1 power. So that means in order to do that, all I have to do is flip my fraction, and I'm good. So I'm going to bring d to the fourth to the top, and I'm going to bring c squared to the bottom. So this right here is your simplified and final answer for number 9. So for number 10, let's simplify underneath. So we can simplify x squared divided by x to the first. That's going to cancel out to be just x to the first. And we're dividing that by y to the fifth. Now all of that's being raised to the negative 2 power. So before I deal with that 2, I'm going to deal with the negative. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip everything inside of that fraction. And now I'm ready to distribute in my 2. Remember that 3 also has an exponent of 1. So now we're going back to taking powers of powers. So I'm going to be multiplying each of those exponents by 2. So y to the 5 times 2 is 10. 3 to the 1 times 2 is going to be 3 squared. X to the 1 times 2 is x squared. So last but not least, we need to finish out 3 squared, which is 9, and then we get x squared. So you get y to the 10th divided by 9x squared as your final answer for number 10. Taking a look at number 11, let's go ahead and let's simplify on the inside first. So I have y, and then I'm dividing it by x to the 5th, but this x to the negative 3 is negative on the bottom, or on the top, so I'm going to flip it to the bottom. Again, all of that's being raised to the negative 1. Well, now I have y divided by, well, these are both being multiplied together on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and add those exponents. 5 plus 3 is going to give me 8. So that y has an exponent of 1, and that's being raised to the negative 1. So now to get rid of that negative, I can just flip the fraction. So I get x to the 8th divided by y. And that's just to the first power. Well, anything to the first power is just the same thing as itself. So your final answer then is x to the 8th divided by y. Last but not least, let's do number 12. So again, we want to simplify underneath the radical first. So first thing I want to do, or underneath the radical, I want to simplify inside of the parentheses. So 4 and 6, both are divisible by 2, and that leaves us with the fraction 2/3. X to the 3rd and y to the 1st are positive on top. That x is positive on the bottom, but that y to the negative 2 is negative on the bottom, so I'm going to flip it to the top. Again, all of that being raised to the negative 2 power. I'll worry about that in a second. So then I have 2 over 3, and I have x to the 3rd divided by x to the 1st. So you subtract those exponents, and you end up with x squared. Then you have y to the 1st times y squared. Since they're both in the numerator of the fraction, that gives you y to the 3rd. Now all of that is being raised to the negative 2 power. So first thing I'm going to do is deal with that negative. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip that fraction over. So I'm going to put my 3 on top and my 2x squared y cubed on the bottom. Now that's only being raised to the second power. It's not negative. Now remember that 2 has an exponent of 1 and that 3 has an exponent of 1. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 2 and I'm going to distribute it in to each of those exponents. So 3 to the 1 times 2 is 2, divided by 2 to the 1 times 2 is 2, x to the 2 times 2 is 4, y to the 3 times 2 is 6. So now we just need to simplify out our coefficients. 3 times 3, or 3 squared, is 9. 2 squared is 4. And then you have x to the 4th, y to the 6th. So this right here is your final answer for number 12. So that concludes your note for you today. Please make sure you take your Schoology quiz once you're done. Thanks for listening.